Hey guys, welcome back to another episode where today we're still doing math, Algebra 2. This time we're on Chapter 3, and this is going to be Part 3 out of 4. Today we're going to be learning how to solve by square roots. So this basically means like you have an equation, for instance, like this 4x plus 3, and put those in parentheses. You have a squared plus 50 equals something like 194. Now, when you have this, the first thing you should do is just minus 50. And then minus 50 on this side too. So you should end up with 4x plus 3 in parentheses equals 144. Now, what you do is you just take the square roots of each. So now you have 4x plus 3 equals 12. But since it's a square root, it would be plus or minus 12. Now, you can basically divvy them up where you minus 3 and have like a negative 12, so it would be negative 15, or it would be a positive 12, so you'd end up with 9. So let's just put our two options. You have negative 15 and 9. So it'd be 4x equals negative 15, and 4x equals 9. This would equal about, you just put this as x equals 9 over 4. And with this equation, you just do x equals negative 15 over 4. So these would be your square roots, or how you'd solve by square roots would be these two answers. Now an easier one or easier example would be just x squared equals 64. This is pretty easy since 64 has the square root of 8, so it'd just be x equals positive or negative 8 after you take the square roots. So that's probably one of the easiest ones. Now let's move on to something a little harder. So something harder would be factoring. There are 3 types of factoring. There's grouping, diamond method, and guess and check. Guess and check is like the hardest one, I think, because I mean it's just you're literally guessing and checking. It's like you have a number of, let's just say 7 and 6. Now you need to find something that adds up to both and multiplies to both, or just one. Like for instance, 6 plus 1 equals 7. That's good. Now you take, since you have these two, now you just do what times what equals 6. 6 times 1 equals 6. So now you have 6 and 7. You just did the guess and check system with these, and you just used these two for your equation. Now a different method would be grouping and diamond. They can both be done at the same time. So let's have the equation x squared plus 7x plus 6 equals 0. So now you have that equation. You can have the grouping and diamond method of 6 and 7, make like a little, actually like a diamond, and just say this is going to be A times C, and this is just going to be B. So 6 times 1 is 6, and then B is 7, so that's 6 and 7. So now you're figuring out, okay, what adds up to 7 and what multiplies to 6? Well, it's just 6 and 1. just like last time, but just a little different. So now from that, you can look over here at this equation and then just use your 1 and 6, x plus 6 and x plus 1. Put those in parentheses. And that's the answer. That's how you use the diamond method to solve this equation. Now, using the grouping method is a little different. It's you take the numbers that you found over here, the 6 and 1, and you use them, but you split up the 7. So it'd be x squared plus 1x plus 6x plus 6 equals 0. And then you group them. So it's like you group these and you group these. Now, what can you take out of this equation? X squared plus x. Well, you can take out x. So it's going to be x plus 1. Okay, now what can you take out of here? 6x and 6. You can take out 6. So you do plus 6x plus 1. Because 6 times x is 6x, and 6 times 1 is 6. Now that you have these, you can just take this equation and this equation. They're the same thing, so you can just put this over here. And then you take these and put them in their own equation. That's 6 plus x. And there you go. There's the diamond method over here and the grouping method over here. Next, we're going to be learning about imaginary numbers. Oof, this sucks. Imaginary numbers are literally the worst. They're just painful. So imaginary numbers are represented by I. I is equal to the square root of -1. So that means I squared equals -1. You need to remember this. This is important. Just underline that a couple times. Now, another thing of imaginary units are complex numbers. Complex numbers are real numbers mixed in with imaginary numbers, like -3 plus 4i. It's a regular number and then an imaginary number, and that makes a complex number. But that also means that since having a real number and an imaginary number is going to be a complex number, having just an imaginary number like this, it means it's a pure imaginary number. Now let's go on to completing the squares of imaginary numbers, like this. Square root of -49. This means it's going to be -7, so it's going to be 7i. Since this makes it imaginary, it's not going to be just 7, it's going to be 7i. Same thing for -4. The square root of 4 is 2, so it's going to be 2i. Now let's get on to some more complicated stuff. Some more complicated stuff being -2 times the square root of -100. Now, the square root of 100 is 10. So, it would be 10i. But since we have this number over here, we need to multiply 10i by -2, making it -20i. Now, another one like this is 6 times the square root of -121. The square root of 121 is 11, so it'd be 11i. Of course, you have to multiply it by the 6, so now it's going to be 66i. Now, let's do this a final time, but with an even more difficult number, like 5 times the square root of -75. Now, this is an even harder number because there's no square root of 75. So, we have to take out basically what comes out to this. 25 times -1 times 3. Now, we can get 25 down even lower, so we need to take the square root of that. Since we're doing that, we also need to take the square root of all the other ones. So it's going to come about to 5i times I times the square root of 3, because you can't go any lower than that. And the square root of -1 is I, and the square root of 25 is 5. So this all checks out. So then it needs to be written as 5i times the square root of 3. Now, we still have the 5 up here, so we need to take 25 times 5. So our final answer should be 25i times the square root of 3. Easy. Okay, now we need the equality of two complex numbers. This is kind of tricky. So let's put an equation up here. -10 plus I equals 30 minus yi. So we need to remember that, of course, I is equal to the square root of -1, and we need to split these apart or group them together. So it would look something like this. -10, oh, this is x. -10x equals 30, and I equals -yi. So divided by -10 divided by -10, we have x equals -3, and then divide by -I, divide by -I, and we have 1 left, so that's y equals to be -1. Let's try one more. We have 44 minus half of yi equals -1/4 x minus 7i. So first, you equal them out. 44 equals -1/4 x, and then we have -half yi equals -7i. So first we just divide by -1/4, divide by -1/4, and from there we get -176x, and just divide by -1/2, divide by -1/2, we have y equals 14. That is the basics on how to solve the equality of two complex numbers. Just split them up like these and solve. Pretty easy stuff. Okay, now we move on to adding and subtracting complex numbers. So this will be like -8 plus 3i plus -1 minus 2i. So what you need to do is just combine the numbers. Since this is a plus, you just combine them. 3i plus 2i is only 1i, and -8i plus -1i is -9i. So it's going to be -9 plus I. This is going to be an imaginary solution, so just watch out for that. Let's try another one, but this one is going to be subtraction. Now, 36 minus 3i minus 12 plus 24i. So this negative right here turns this entire equation over here into its opposite values. So it'd be plus -12, and then it would turn this plus right there into a negative. So then after you switch up the signs, you have to combine them. So negative 3i plus negative 24i is going to be negative 27i. And this is 36 plus negative 12, which is going to be 24 minus 27i. This is also going to be imaginary, but still easy enough. And that is the gist of how to do adding and subtracting. You just, when it's when it's subtraction, you just flip the signs of the second equation and then just combine them. Okay, now we're moving on to multiplication. This, of course, is going to be different. This is going to be using the FOIL method. And we really need to remember that this I squared equals negative 1. Because we're going to get that a lot when we are doing multiplication. So, for our first multiplication, let's just do negative 1 plus 9i, and 15 minus I. So let's use the FOIL method. Negative 1 times 15 is going to be negative 15, and negative 1 times I times negative I is going to be positive I. Then 9 times 15 is going to be 135. So it would be plus 135 I, and then 9 times negative I is going to be negative 9i squared. So from this, you just combine them. So push this to the front. Nope. Remember over here, I squared is negative I. That would turn this negative 9i squared into just 9. So it would be negative 15 plus 9. That would be negative 6. So this is going to turn out through negative 6 plus 136i. Because 1i plus 135i is 136. Combine these two after you turn this into a positive 9. It's going to be negative 6. So after using the FOIL method, this equation is going to equal negative 6 plus 136. Okay, let's try one more. Let's make this one also different. Let's do 15i negative 1 plus 2i. Now this is where there's not parentheses on this side because it's only a single number. So 15 times negative 1 is going to be negative 15i. Then 15i times 2i is going to be 30i squared. Now, since I squared is negative 1, it's going to turn this into a negative. So it's going to be negative 15i minus 30. And our last multiplication of the day will be single parentheses, which is just going to be negative 3i and then 10i. But they're both in parentheses. So it's just a single multiplication. It's just boop, which is going to be minus 30i. That translates to just 30 after I squared equals negative 1. So it's just going to be 30. Sweet. Okay, now we're moving on to finding complex solutions / zeros. So let's start off with the equation 0 equals 5x squared plus 25. Now, first thing you do is, of course, minus 25 minus 25. That equals negative 25 equals 5x squared. Divide by 5, divide by 5. That will equal negative 5 equals, negative 5 equals x squared. That's usually where you'd stop, but now that we're finding stuff with square roots, we need to square root this, square root this, which would equal x equals plus or minus I, the square root of 5. Since it's a negative over here, you have to make this I, because I is equal to the square root of negative 1. Okay, let's do one more. So x squared minus 10 equals negative 18. Do plus 10 plus 10 equals x squared equals negative 8. Square root of that, square root of that. And since there's no square roots of 8, you just find what does multiply to it. There's going to be negative 1 times 4 times 2. Because 4 times 2 is going to be 8. Then negative 1 times 8 is going to be negative 8. So you can factor negative 4 one more time. So square root of that, square root of that, square root of that. So it's going to be turned to I. This is going to turn into 2. And this is going to turn to the square root of 2. So when you plug that in, it's going to be x equals plus or minus 2I, the square root of 2. That's going to be a solution for that one. Okay, now we're going to solve harder equations by square roots. But we're going to factor them first. So, we're given the equation x squared plus 4x plus 4 equals 36. Now, we need to factor these if we're going to use the square roots. So 2 plus 2 and 2 times 2 both equal 4, so that works here. So it's going to be x plus 2 and then x plus 2 equals 36. Now, we can take the square roots. This would be x plus 2 equals plus or minus 6. So now that we got that, we can take the plus or negative. So you minus 2 minus 2. Now 6 minus 2 is going to be x equals 4. And then negative 6 plus negative 2 equals negative 8. So these are your two solutions after factoring right here, and then taking the square roots here. Okay, let's do one more of these. So x squared plus 30x plus 225 equals 121. Now, we need to factor this. What times what? What plus what equals what? What times what? So this can be divided by 2. 15 plus 15 equals 30. And 15 times 15 equals 225. So it's going to be x plus 15, x plus 15, parentheses, equals 121. Now, we just need to take the square roots of this and square roots of that. We get x plus 15 equals plus or minus 11. So, minus 15 minus 15. 11 minus 15 is going to be x equals negative 4. And negative 11 plus negative 15 is going to be x equals negative 26. So, these are your two answers for factoring and then taking the square roots. Hey guys, I just wanted to thank you for watching. Chapter 3 is a pretty long chapter, so there's going to be part 2 of chapter 3, but this is still going to go as part 3 of my exam reviews. So, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. See ya!